Guys, The Flash is bombing at the box office, and the DCEU is dead. Before I get into why I think it's bombing, I do want to address why I don't think it's bombing. First of all, I don't actually think that comic book movie fatigue has much of anything to do here. I think what we've clearly been seeing is mediocre movie fatigue, not necessarily comic book movie fatigue, right? Because yes, we've seen movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, Black Adam, and Shazam: Fury of the Gods, and now The Flash, all bombing. But we've also had movies like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. These movies have been doing very well at the box office. So what's the difference between those two groups of movies? Well, one half of that group are good. The other group is poo-poo caca, right? Audiences are going to see good movies. Audiences are not going to see bad movies. Now, obviously, this is all subjective. Maybe you think some of the movies that have made a lot of money are bad. Maybe you think some of the movies that haven't made a bunch of money are good. But audiences are going to speak and vote with their wallets. So I don't think that there's just this blanket comic book movie fatigue. I think it's just mediocre movie fatigue. The other thing that I don't actually think has much to do with the box office performance of The Flash is the fact that it's getting rebooted. I've seen a lot of people say that because James Gunn announced the reboot, well, people just don't care about this movie anymore. I guess there's no way to definitively know this, but I don't think that most people in the general audience even knows that there's going to be a DC reboot, right? I think we have to get out of our bubble a little bit and realize that most people are not going onto Twitter and browsing movie news websites and are super up to date with everything that's going on in comic book movies. Most people just casually go and watch movies, right? So I don't know that most people even know that there's a DC reboot going on. So there's all of that. Why is this movie bombing then, if it's not for those reasons, right? I think that, first of all, the DCEU, the brand of the DCEU, as I mentioned at the top of this video, is dead. People do not care anymore. It just is what it is, After Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad and then Justice League, people have just kind of given up on this universe. I mean, it is what it is. And a lot of people seem to think that, oh, well, if you just bring back Zack Snyder and Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill, then audiences will flood back into the theaters. Sorry, dude, but the Henry Cavill cameo at the end of Black Adam didn't save that movie. Ben Affleck is in The Flash. He's prominently shown in the trailers. Didn't make people interested in the movie. I totally get that a lot of you guys love those interpretations of the characters. You guys love Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill and whatnot. Audiences don't care about them. They just don't. And again, like I said, most people don't know about the James Gunn reboot. Most people don't know who directs these movies. No offense. Most people don't have no idea who the hell Zack Snyder even is. So this idea that, oh, well, audiences just want the Snyderverse. No, I don't think that that's the case, unfortunately. So there's that. Now, aside from the DCEU being dead, what is the main reason, the ultimate reason? The reason why I wanted to wait until The Flash was in its second weekend before I made this video to see if it had any legs? The movie's just not good. And that's at the end of the day. I think that's going to be the important thing to look at, right? when analyzing as to why a movie is doing poorly. Audiences just don't like it very much. Now, you might disagree. You might say that the Flash is a good movie in your opinion, and that's totally fair. but clearly audiences just kind of disagree with you. The movie has had terrible word of mouth. So I guess to be clear, the movie opened up with like $55 million in its opening weekend. That's terrible, and that's evidence of the damage that has been done to the DCEU branding. And the movie dropped like 74% to like $15 million in its second weekend. And yeah, that is evidence of the movie not being very good and not having good word of mouth. So I think people need to get out of their nerd bubbles. And I think people need to just get into the shoes of a general audience member, okay? You don't know anything about the reboot or anything like that. Honestly, you probably don't even know about Ezra Miller's shenanigans, right? Which I haven't even mentioned. I also don't know that had much to do with it either. You probably don't know about that. All you know is that you've given up on the DCEU and you haven't heard good word of mouth about the movie. So, now with that out of the way, how do you move forward at this point? You are James Gunn now, or I am James Gunn. What do I do to save the DC brand as a whole? Well, as far as the DCEU is concerned, it is dead. Bury it. You have to move on. And I'm already seeing that James Gunn is not doing that. Listen, I love Peacemaker. I think Peacemaker's a fantastic show. And in his defense, it was actually very successful on HBO Max. But it's connected to the DCEU. You can't keep the DCEU alive, right? There's an Amanda Waller show coming out as well. Played by Viola Davis. She's connected to the DCEU, dude. Like, you can't, or at the very least, it's not smart, I don't think, to pick and choose your projects, your properties, to continue on forward. I really do feel like he really should have just ripped the Band-Aid and said, listen, we have to move on completely. Now, to be fair, again, putting yourself in the shoes of the general audience member, do you necessarily look at Peacemaker and directly connect it to the DCEU? Or, as the general audience member, will you look at a brand new Superman and a brand new Batman and sort of make the connection that way, that this is a brand new universe? I do think that a new Superman and a new Batman will make that statement. But yeah, I don't know that. I still do think that Peacemaker and Amanda Waller, played by Viola Davis, continuing is going to muddy those waters. And I mean, yeah, obviously it should be a given, right? You can't bring back Ezra Miller as the Flash. I mean, okay, now I'm stepping out of the general audience's shoes. Just morally, you can't do it. Like the guy did too when he messed up things. Just morally, he should not come back as the Flash. No, I don't see that happening. And you know, I also think you have to get rid of Jason Momoa as Aquaman. I mean, again, it's just connecting him back to the DCEU. Don't be reactionary, right? Listen, the first Aquaman shocked us and made $1 billion. If the second Aquaman is successful as well, do not be reactionary. You don't keep him around. He is too connected to the old DCEU. So yeah, I really do think at this point it needs to be just a complete reboot. It cannot have any ties, any associations to the DCEU, because we just had a movie with Batman and the Flash that is going to end up making less money than Black Adam. That is the lowest of lows. I mean, bro. So there's that. What else do you do? I mean, listen, this is the most obvious thing that really shouldn't need to be stated. But you just have to make better movies. At the end of the day, that is the most important thing. You have to make good movies, right? I mean, again, we just look at the DCEU lately, right? Black Adam, not good enough. Shazam! Fury of the Gods, not good enough. The Flash, not good enough. Blue Beetle, it doesn't look good enough. I mean, again, I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it'll surprise us, but it doesn't look good enough. Aquaman. I don't even think they've dropped a trailer for Aquaman, but after the first one, sure, it made a lot of money, but I didn't think it was very good, and I don't know that audiences will turn out for a second one if it's not much better. Again, with how the DCEU has fallen, I don't know that that same $1 billion worth of people will show up for a second one. Could be wrong. I'm sure it'll make more money than a lot of the recent movies, but yeah, I don't know. You have to make better movies, and I will say, James Gunn does make fantastic movies. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that whereas Ant-Man and the Lost Quantumania fell way below expectations at $400 million, right? Almost bumping into DCEU territory. I don't think it's a coincidence that then James Gunn's movie, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, went on to make $850 million, right? Went on to be very successful because it was a great movie, right? It opened well because the Guardians brand is strong, and it continued to have legs because word of mouth spread, right? Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, you got to watch it. So, yeah. Listen, this is the DCEU will go down as one of the biggest failures in cinematic history, right? And honestly, if you really think about it, cinematic universes in general have just not worked beside Marvel, the MCU. I mean, it is true. It is the facts. So James Gunn has a very difficult job ahead of him. I mean, listen, there's no doubt about it. And actually, another thing I want to note up front that is that the road ahead is rocky. I think that we are going to run. I think they are going to run into probably 2 flops with Blue Beetle and Aquaman. That's just my prediction. I could be wrong. I think DC is going to run into 2 flops, and I'm going to say this as well. I don't think it's likely that Superman Legacy makes a ton of money, even if it's great. Even if it's great, I don't know that it's going to make a ton of money because the DC brand is that is that broken right now. So I also think they need to huddle down and accept that that is most likely going to happen, acknowledge that, and say, all right, we're going to weather the storm a bit, but we can rebuild the brand. I think that is the mentality that they have to go with. Because as long as Superman Legacy is great and it has good word of mouth, even if it doesn't do crazy numbers, it'll help start rebuilding the brand. And then if you come in with a Brave and the Bold, that's great. Don't know how confident I am if Andy Muschietti is directing it, but let's just assume it's great. That will continue rebuilding that brand. And I think that if you can have two strong Superman and Batman movies, I think that could clear a path for future success. I do think that is possible. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think about any and all of that. Those are just my thoughts on what's going on currently with DC. It's looking dire, folks. But at the end of the day, I think I'll end with this. I think it's good that mediocre movies are not doing well at the box office. I don't necessarily wish failure on anybody. I don't necessarily, because a lot of these things cause people to lose jobs and whatnot. So I don't necessarily wish failure on anybody. But at the end of the day, studios don't care if we think a movie's good or bad. All they care about is whether or not we show up for it. I think that us showing up for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I think us showing up for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I think going a bit back into the pandemic, people showing up for Top Gun Maverick, I think that sends a message to studios. That is the only way we can communicate. So hopefully that this all leads to a better MCU. Hopefully it leads to a good DCU. Hopefully it leads to better movies in general. So yeah, like I said before, let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.